Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the second webinar series, or the second webinar as part of the CSCRS webinar series. So before we get started, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to the Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety and tell you a little bit more about our webinar series. So the Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety is one of two national centers with a designated research focus on transportation safety. We bring together staff, faculty, and students from 4 different UNC departments, including the Highway Safety Research Center, the Department of City and Regional Planning, and the School of Public Health. And we also partner with 4 other universities, including Duke University, Florida Atlantic University, Berkeley University of California, and UTK. The goal of the Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety is to accelerate progress in reducing transportation injuries and fatalities by utilizing a systems approach to bring perspectives from planning, engineering, public health, data science, and robotics to the road safety field. And we do this by focusing on 4 specific areas, namely defining safe systems principles and practices and their role in a Vision Zero program, which you'll hear more about today. Advancing fundamental safety research, including focusing on emerging travel trends such as e-scooters, ride-hailing, and e-commerce impact on road freight. Developing innovative safety data and analysis methods, including safety and health data generation and integration, and preparing and equipping future leaders through university courses, student-led research, and K-12 activities. So to start off our webinar today, I would like to introduce Leah Shahum. And Leah Shahum is the founder and director of the Vision Zero Network. She serves on the steering group of the National Road to Zero Coalition, as well as the advisory board of the Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety. As a German Marshall Fund Fellow, Leah researched Vision Zero strategies in Sweden, Germany, and the Netherlands. Prior to that, Leah served as the executive director of the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, and she also served as a policymaker on the boards of directors of the Golden Gate Bridge, Highway and Transportation District and the SF Municipal Transportation Agency, as well as the National Alliance for Biking and Walking. And Leah is going to get our webinar today kicked off, and this is called Strengthening Existing and Facilitating New Vision Zero Plans. And with that, I will turn it over to Leah. Thanks, Leah.
Thanks so much, Wes. Hi, everybody. Yay, really happy to be here. Can you see my slides all right there? And are they looking okay? Well, let me get them in the right mode. How's that looking? Looking okay? All right, I will assume that is good. Hi, everybody. Leah Shahum with the Vision Zero Network. Thanks so much for the chance to be here. I'm really excited to learn from the great research that you all are doing and hopefully really share this out with folks. And just a little bit of introduction of the Vision Zero Network. We're a nonprofit group, and really what we're helping do is supporting local communities in their Vision Zero efforts. So as more and more communities are committing to Vision Zero, we want to help them understand how is Vision Zero more than just a slogan, more than just a great desire and a great goal, but rather a real shift in how we're thinking and how we're doing work. So make sure this is working. Is that working okay, everybody? Looks like I just want to make sure that.
Blank.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay. Thanks for letting me know. Let's make sure. 1 second.
There it goes. I can see that now.
It's coming out now.
Great. That's okay?
Yeah.
Super. Okay. Thanks so much. Great. So yeah, Vision Zero as a nonprofit, we work with communities across the country, and let me actually share a map with you just to get a sense here. There are 45 communities that have made a Vision Zero commitment in the US, and that ranges from cities, I'm looking at places like Durham and Tampa, Florida, and Portland, Oregon, and Denver, to a few regions, places like the Denver region of Council of Government, which is like their metropolitan planning organization, and a few other regional and county entities, but mostly local. But what we really do is help these folks understand and really kind of learn what is Vision Zero. Again, how do we think beyond just the kind of the slogan and the title of it to really make meaningful change, and then really to connect them with each other. So if you're on this call and you're working on Vision Zero, or if you're just interested in it, want to learn more, please check out our website, visionzeronetwork.org, and you'll have lots and lots of resources there. And of course, on today's webinar, I know we're going to learn a lot more about plans, which is super, super important. I'm just going to share a little bit of background today, kind of big picture, very briefly, kind of what is Vision Zero, but I'd say I'm going to emphasize more, where are we kind of in the US, and at least from my, my take, if there's areas we should be emphasizing more, et cetera. So it's kind of going to be the take. So it's kind of my assessment of where we are in the US. You'll see kind of a range, a spectrum here from the traditional approach, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but kind of the way we've been doing things, over the past, to the Vision Zero approach. And, I would say most of us around the world, and definitely in the country, most are in the traditional approach, doing it the way we've done it. And then we've got about those 45 communities or so that have made the Vision Zero commitment. Of course, there's a range there. Some have been in on it longer than others, and I'll just highlight New York City, having been the first US community to commit to Vision Zero, has seen significant change. They have reduced traffic deaths by about 30% in their that was the first 4 years of their work. The rest, I'll be honest, we're behind them, I'd say, behind in the resources going into it and the change happening, but I would say we're on our way with plans, with processes being put in place. But what I really want to draw your attention to is, I think, where we need to be going. So in this blue section, really thinking about what will it take to make a real difference. And it really is going to be about the safe systems approach, which I know we'll talk about more here, and really being open to and embracing transformative change. This is not about fiddling on the edges or tweaking things. It really is about significant transformation. So really want to encourage people, I think, in this next phase of Vision Zero. We're not brand new to it anymore. We're starting to understand what it means, et cetera, but really be thinking about the big game changers. And part of that is reducing motor vehicles. It is slowing speeds. And it is, of course, reducing or minimizing conflict between road users. So just want to highlight that kind of from the very start, that I think I hope that we are in kind of a next phase here in the US around Vision Zero and making it effective. I think the positive is that this is possible. We know from other places like Helsinki and Oslo, both have significantly improved safety. And there's countries all over the world who are doing much better than the US. Actually, let me show this. Here's just some of them. So many, many, many other, let's say, high-income nations are reducing their traffic deaths, and they are changing the status quo. So kind of give this as I don't want to be shaking my finger too much at the US, but it really is, I hope, as a boost of, hey, we can do this. Other communities are making the change. These things are not impossible to change. And frankly, we need to, the US, catch up. So that is hard. I guess I don't want to be too much of a Pollyanna either. This is just a small sampling of some of the challenges we're up against. For instance, we know that this year, 2020, as strange and awful as it's been in so many ways, unfortunately, we've seen a higher rate of traffic deaths, even though we probably have fewer people out traveling, and you can read more about that. We're learning more and more about the dangers of larger vehicles and understanding that, and you see that in the pictures there. And just really acknowledging that the reality is, there are many places, often in state and federal transportation policy, that are not necessarily aligned, as I think they should be, for a safety first approach. But let's not get too down on that. These are challenges, absolutely. But I think really what's happening is, in this world of traffic safety, the goal of safety is not new, right? We've always cared about safety. We've always worked hard towards safety. But I think what's happening is that, there are more conversations, there's more leadership, both from the public sector and the nonprofit sector, really recognizing that, hey, this isn't just about caring more or working harder. It really is, we do need change. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Very briefly, a kind of high level summary of how does Vision Zero differ from the traditional approach? And I know, obviously, today's presentations are going to dig much deeper into this, much more detail, but just kind of the highlights here. And I'll highlight just maybe this top one, that this idea of traffic deaths being inevitable, that there's, that this is an unfortunate cost of doing business in modern society, that really is shifted in Vision Zero. And again, it's not just a slogan to say we want zero traffic deaths. It is to say, hey, and to believe everyone has the right to safe mobility, whether they're going to school or work or a playground, whether they're walking, driving, biking, taking transit, that our top goal needs to be safe mobility, not just mobility at any cost. So you'll see some other differences here. And just to give an example here, really thinking about the safe systems approach and how does that lead to safe mobility, partly it's really thinking about, where do we make the changes? And if you look at the bottom right, individual road users, absolutely, we need to continue. We spend a lot of time on encouraging individual road users to do the right thing, the safe thing, the legal thing. And no one's I'm certainly not arguing against that, right? We want people to be safe individually in their habits and choices. Then you look to the left at the bottom. The reality is, though, and Vision Zero and Safe Systems really acknowledges this, sometimes people do make mistakes in all sorts of modes, right? In all types of life. Sometimes people do make mistakes. So going back or going up now to the top, what we're really saying with Vision Zero and Safe Systems is let's acknowledge that those mistakes sometimes happen. We want to minimize them. We want to do everything we can to help mistakes not happen, but they will happen. People are fallible. So how do we really put more emphasis on what we call the upstream levels? These are policymakers who set speed limits and make policy decisions. These are system planners. Those are planners, engineers, transportation planners, public health folks, police, of course, who are really on the ground planning or doing operations and such. So really thinking about how can those systems be improved so that when crashes happen, and again, they're inevitable, some crashes will happen, what we want is, hey, no one gets hurt because it's been designed a certain way, the streets are designed a certain way, the speeds are low enough, especially when you have people walking and biking, vulnerable road users. Either no one gets hurt or these are recoverable, right? It's a broken ankle or a fender bender versus something much more severe and serious. And I just want to acknowledge that this means bucking up against some kind of long-held myths and ways of believing. And I focus on this one a little bit because people may have seen this statistic. It's definitely not my statistic, but something that is said a lot in the professional transportation world. This idea of, quote, 94% of traffic crashes being caused by human error, end of quote. I won't get into it too much, but that is a very misleading statistic. Really what it's saying is that a human is involved in some form or fashion. The reason I'm bringing this up is part of what we're doing with Vision Zero and Safe Systems is helping people understand these deaths, these severe injuries are not inevitable. It's not just a matter of, human error, humans are going to do dumb things, so let's just let it all happen. The reality is, down at the bottom, we can change systems. We can design streets differently. We can lower speeds so that if and when crashes happen, they are not severe. They are not life-threatening. So if folks have heard that 94% stat, you will maybe take a grain of salt next time we hear that or push back a little bit. And kind of thinking back up to this systems approach, this is a model used in the public health world a great deal, and we're really appreciative. The group called Prevention Institute inspired us with this, shared this, really thinking about, sure, again, we want to be working on those yellow levels. We want to be promoting individual responsibility and good decision making and safe choices. Yes, but we need to be spending more on the higher levels and again, upstream. So policy, legislation, and some examples here. Again, you see on the kind of yellow bottom levels, yes, let's remind people to be safe, et cetera. At the same time, we need to be putting a lot more energy into the street design, into the policies like speed setting, et cetera. So part of what Vision Zero is doing is helping us shift there. I also want to highlight very quickly, we don't have time, but this is also a really important way to be shifting away from an overemphasis on traffic enforcement and particularly police-led enforcement. Because the reality is a lot of times, police are out there stopping folks, et cetera, but it's partly because there are frankly not necessarily a safe, good environment or good choices. And I'll just give an example of, you hear about these all the time, unfortunately, a family running across the street, a mom pushing a stroller, running across a busy street, not at a crosswalk to get to a bus stop. If they're hit, it's technically their fault. I mean, I wouldn't say that, but the worry is about, is the infrastructure there? Is the design there? Was that system in place for that family to cross the street safely and catch their bus? And time again, especially in many places, they've not set up the systems safely. So just kind of, I want to make that connection between how enforcement can sometimes be overused to make up for a deficit and a problematic system or environment. So real quickly, I'm going to wind down with just 2 lessons. I'd say, the way I'm thinking about this right now, and I think I borrowed this from you all there at CSCRS, is really trust the science. I mean, number one, we know how much our body can withstand, the average human body can withstand in a crash. So let's plan for it. And that means speeds. How do we set speeds, design streets for certain speeds? So let's really trust the science and start re-engaging or redesigning with that front of center. And then the reality is we also know a lot about what works, right? And here's a speed focus, but if we redesign streets, if we lower speed limits, especially in cities where you have different modes, if we use technology that works thoughtfully, carefully, in an equitable way, we can really change behavior out there. And I just want to give credit, folks like Portland, Oregon, their 20 is Plenty campaign, and you're seeing this all over the country now, more and more people reducing their speeds. And I'll just put a plug in, make sure speed management is a key part of your Vision Zero plan, which you're going to hear more about. And I want to just give a little shout out here. This is San Francisco, California's most recent Vision Zero plan, or just this little summary of it. But really thinking about how the work of traffic safety links in with other areas like climate change, climate action, thinking about land use and housing needs. So really thinking about the intersectionality of these issues, which of course is tough, but important. And then really making sure that they're not shying away from the tough strategies, which you see on the orange section there, thinking about reducing vehicle miles traveled, lowering speed limits in cities, using automated enforcement carefully, thoughtfully, et cetera. So again, these are not just ideas of how do we tweak the edges, but how do we make significant change to really make safety first. And it's another image from San Francisco where I live, just to remember, this is really about people's lives. And this is a wonderful man I've gotten to know, Alvin, who lost his son, Armin. You'll see a photo of him on the right there. His son was hit and killed by a driver while Armin was skateboarding a couple years ago. And just to really remember that all of these choices we're making, these policy decisions, the advocacy we do, the plans that you're doing are really about folks' lives. And to wind down, it's really about more. Vision Zero, when we're successful, means more time with loved ones, more birthdays, more opportunity for celebrations in life. So I will wind down there. Thank you so much, you guys, for the opportunity, and I'll hand it back over.
Great, thank you so much, Leah. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Seth and Kelly, our 2 speakers today on the webinar, Strengthening Existing and Facilitating New Vision Zero Plans. So Seth LaJeunesse is a Senior Research Associate with the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center. He designs studies that draw from psychology, sociology, and system science to explore ways of accelerating the diffusion of travel mode shift and safety innovations. Seth is a member of the American Planning Association and the Transportation Research Board's Pedestrian Committee. Formerly a school psychologist, he holds a master's degree in city and regional planning from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I'd also like to introduce Dr. Kelly Evenson. Kelly Evenson is a professor at the UNC Department of Epidemiology and the Gilling School of Public Health. She focuses her research on physical activity epidemiology, including how policies and environments impact walking and bicycling. All right, go ahead, Seth.
Hey, thanks, Wes. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon or this morning, wherever you might be at the moment. Leah, thank you so much for kicking us off with such a powerful note. We're going to hopefully echo a lot of the things that you had conveyed during your talk. So basically, what we'll talk about today, Dr. Evenson and I, is some work we've been doing over the past few years regarding Vision Zero planning in the United States, drawing from inspiration from abroad too, to kind of inform what we're looking at. We've been focusing on the actual processes involved in making and developing Vision Zero plans and how we can incorporate system science and safe systems thinking into the plans. Let's see here. So very briefly, we're going to cover some of this because Leah already has sort of introduced a lot of this. We'll talk about what Vision Zero is, knowledge among kind of professional sectors of Vision Zero. Kelly will then talk about what we're learning about the content and kind of distribution of Vision Zero plans in the US, as well as the implementation of Vision Zero with and without a plan. And then we'll bring it back to North Carolina, where we're based at the University of North Carolina, talking about how we're propping up Vision Zero in this state. So very briefly, this is something that we totally steal from our friend Leah at the Vision Zero Network, so that we all have a common understanding of what we mean by Vision Zero, is that we are eliminating the fatal and serious injuries on our roadways while also increasing the safe, healthy, and equitable mobility for everybody. What we're not saying is that there will be no more crashes. What we're saying is that no one should be gravely or fatally injured while traveling. As Leah rightly notes, this started basically the Vision Zero concept in Sweden in the mid-90s. It spread rapidly across Europe and has made its way over here sometime around 2013, 2014, when it started in New York, as Leah said. And we're going to talk a little bit about how it's diffusing actually through the US, not only in major US cities, but in smaller places as well. So really briefly, I want to just bring up a poll, if we could, just to explore your involvement or knowledge of either your home or workplace's Vision Zero efforts. If you can select the option that most closely aligns with your experience. Let's take a minute to do that. So which one? It looks like we have quite a few on the line, which is wonderful to hear. We didn't expect this. Over half are saying that it's part of your job. That's wonderful. About a quarter are saying that your community that you either work or live in doesn't really have a Vision Zero program. A little fewer than those are saying they're aware of but not necessarily involved in, and then fewer are volunteering time. It's wonderful to hear that so many on the call are actually involved in Vision Zero. So, and for those who are not and just curious about what it is, welcome as well. It's wonderful to have this sort of blend here. So with that, I'll go into some of the things we're learning from international practice, because they have now a couple of decades worth of experience. And as Leah showed, and I'll kind of reiterate, you know, they have a different safety experience than we do. They're making greater gains. We had started this work, and Wes mentioned earlier, with one of the universities that were in the consortium for the Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety, Eric Dumba and Louis Merlin. Several of us at UNC, we worked with them to understand how Vision Zero got started, how they're implementing safe systems, any barriers they encountered, et cetera. From this, sort of distilled some guiding principles. And Leah has touched upon these already. The human body has no unlimited ability to tolerate crash forces. This is what we're talking about. We're trying to eliminate these really serious crash forces. People are going to make mistakes. We need to understand that and design that into the system. And I will even make a stronger point on the system designers. In fact, they, in a lot of European settings, as well as in Australasia, a lot of the system designers share more of a responsibility for crash prevention than the road users. So what Leah was saying with those kind of upstream factors, the people that design the roads and develop policies. So if we are all the land use environment, the transportation system designers, road users, policymakers, if we can all work together and align our goals and our strategies, if we can strengthen those, it multiplies the safety impacts of our programming. And so that's sort of where we want to get to, right? As Leah was showing, I think her graph showed like to the 90s. If we look at the peak of where we had seen major, crash outcomes, major fatal outcomes, it was basically in the late 60s, early 70s, most experienced really high levels, their highest levels in history of road fatalities. And since then, it's been kind of a steady-ish decline. However, you can see how the United States is actually kind of broken away from other high-income countries. And this is quite concerning. We've made gains early on, and those gains have been kind of tempered over time. So a lot of us in the field are really revisiting and saying, what can we do differently? What can we do to improve practice? One thing that is happening in a lot of what we're seeing is what we're calling the shifting of the burden from those inside vehicles. A lot of the safety gains we've made over the last couple of decades is for the vehicle occupants. Think even just seatbelt wearing, but you know, the automated braking systems, airbag systems. You have the child occupant protection, child safety seats are more safe than they ever were today. But those outside the vehicle, there has been significantly less investment, and there's actually been more a pressure in terms of them being safe while traversing the environment. So cars are getting larger, they're higher profile. Those are really dangerous for pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists. They're higher horsepower, so they're just more powerful in general. We've seen uptick in posted speed limits over the years in almost all cases across states. So we're seeing, again, this shift from inside the vehicle to outside the vehicle, the burden. And a lot of Vision Zero communities are actually trying to address this very thing. Some of the work that Kelly, myself, and our colleagues at the Highway Safety Research Center, we had conducted a few years ago a survey of those in the transportation realm, or not in the transportation, but the Vision Zero kind of sectors. This is your planners and your engineers, your law enforcement, emergency management systems people, so emergency response, and public health practitioners. And we found that there was really high awareness, especially among those designing and building, you know, the roadways environments. Less so, but still quite high, about 3/4 of in law enforcement, EMS, and in public health. When we look at census regions, again, we see really high sort of awareness of Vision Zero in the South and Northeast, a little less in the West, and then in the Midwest, we saw a little bit less. And we proposed in a manuscript that we put together, maybe we should do some more outreach in the Midwest. Of those who had heard of Vision Zero, it was interesting because to relate that to what we had seen in the poll earlier, 42% at the time had worked in a municipality with a Vision Zero campaign. Sounds like a little more than half of you on the call today are actually directly involved in that. So that's really, really telling. It's wonderful. About 41%, they did not work in a municipality with Vision Zero, and then the rest really weren't sure. Of those who were basically that knew that their community had a Vision Zero campaign, a little more than half were participating in it. So the question we always have is, especially when we know that there are things like Leah laid out, automated speed enforcement, street redesign, policies that really temper speeds on the network. How do we accelerate the adoption of these in the US and North Carolina is something we're exploring as well. One approach from diffusion theory is actually identifying those with a lot of professional influence or your opinion leaders. So in this same survey, we asked people to report on people, organizations, and cities that they look to for road safety advice. We had found major clustering, a lot of opinion leadership in New York, but also in places like Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., and Boston. What's interesting about this, and what's kind of telling, is that these are the places that we could maybe do some demonstration projects, some intervention work, because there's so much attention on these cities already. They can help accelerate basically the uptake of effective practice across the country. And as Leah showed, we had seen that this is actually happening in places large and even smaller. And as Kelly will talk about in a minute, it's also increasingly in regional areas. So it's really nice to see that. So in our survey, we identified all these opinion leaders, and we were heartened to see that all of them were actually identified as Vision Zero community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly so that she can talk about Vision Zero plans.
Thank you, Seth and Leah and Wes, and greetings to the audience. So I'll turn my camera on when we reach the Q&A. Kelly has put links in the chat, and she'll continue to do that as we go along. And you might notice already we have 2 links on safe systems if you're interested in that. So I'm going to share results from a project that Seth and I, along with a number of others, worked on around Vision Zero plans. The focus on plans is important because the development of a plan brings together key stakeholders, and it also sets the stage for the local Vision Zero initiative. So what is a Vision Zero plan? It's a public document that provides the vision for future efforts to reduce traffic fatalities and serious injuries. Each plan is unique and tailored to the community, creating variation between plans. And you can see on this slide where I try to compare Vision Zero plans to what we call action plans. And this is how we use the terminology and how I'll be presenting it today. So Vision Zero plans include a community's vision, and it's developed hopefully through community engagement. It usually is supported by an analysis of current and past conditions for safety, and often these are mapped. The plan should also review existing programs, plans, and policies that overlap with Vision Zero to help identify overlapping goals, areas of strength, and potential partners. And that brought to mind the slide that Leah showed around San Francisco doing that. So a plan also contains goals, objectives, actions, and some plans assign entities to implement the actions as well as to identify funding. And this is the component we call the action plan. And this is where we contrast the two. And then finally, a plan should include information on evaluation and monitoring of implementation. Next slide, please. So in proposing this project, we didn't know what elements Vision Zero plans contained. And at the time, there was very little guidance to guide communities to develop these plans. The one guidance that we did find in 2017 is from the Vision Zero Network, and Kelly will put a link to this publication in the chat. Next slide. So we collected or attempted to collect all Vision Zero plans in the US. We asked for permission to post those plans in a central library, which I'll talk about in a minute. And to date, we've found 41 municipal plans, 3 county plans, 2 regional, and 3 MPO RPO. And so I'll show you these mapped and then also listed in case you have a certain area that you're interested in. Next slide. So this will go by quickly, but this is a map of all the municipalities with Vision Zero plans. And if you're aware of a place that we've missed, go ahead and put it in the chat or let me know. Next slide. This is the actual list of communities that have Vision Zero plans. Next slide. This is a map that then adds the regional plans. So from counties, MPOs, RPOs. Next slide. And this is the listing there. So you can see we have fewer regional plans, but this is an area of growth actually. Next slide. So the best place to find all of these plans is in what we call our library of plans up on the Dataverse. So for each plan that we found, we contacted the community and asked them if we could post their plan to our library. And this slide here shows 46 results that we have. And actually of this morning, we have 47 plans posted. And so a link to this resource will be put in the chat. Next slide. So we can apply the diffusion of innovation theory, which Seth mentioned, to help explain over time how an idea gains momentum and then is diffused. And in this case, the idea is a Vision Zero plan. So if we focus on cities with a population of at least 100,000, this graphic shows the growth of the plans over time. So starting in 2014, we had New York City as the innovator, as well as Seattle. And then the early adopters come next, which we would call the opinion leaders, and that came in 2015 forward. And we're now moving into the early majority for this view from diffusion of innovation. Next slide. So in the project, we wanted to be able to describe the plans, so we needed to develop an abstraction tool. And after we did that, we had a team of 6 people that were trained on using the tool, and we coded a couple of plans, all of us together, to make sure that we were consistent in our coding across plans. And then all plans were coded and a second person checked all of the entries, and any discrepancies were resolved by consensus. We had team meetings regularly to discuss any issues or challenges with the coding. And in the end, we input it into a program called Qualtrics and then did some analysis. And I'll show you just some brief snapshots on the next few slides. So first, on the left column, you can see the years of publication for the first 26 Vision Zero plans that we found. Most of the plans included maps of severe and fatal crashes, but only 8 of the 26 included a description of the history of stakeholder involvement in the development of the plan. In terms of describing public participation, only 4 plans had a very detailed description of this, and 10 did not present any information on this. Next slide. 23 of the plans did include a vision statement that we would expect to see, and of those, 18 identified a year to accomplish the vision, and you can see the years listed there. There was one plan that even had set a goal in the year 2020, all the way to 2035. There was a clear statement of goals linked to measurable outcomes in 13, or about half of the plans, but there were actually 4 plans where no goals were specified. Next slide. So from the framework of the goals, I went back and coded how the goals were framed by theme. And you can see here that the E's dominated in the goals structure. So many of the plans focused their goals around enforcement, education, and engineering on the left. And there were fewer that included a focus on engagement, equity, or encouragement. And there were many other unique themes to the communities. I could have had another slide showing you those, but there was a broad range of themes around the goals. Next slide. The Vision Zero plans also documented a variety of partners in the process. So based on our coding, we can't discern how much contribution each partner made, but we did find most frequently that the partners mentioned were from law enforcement and schools, followed by the others that you see here. And plans engaged in a wide variety of partners, which is great. Next slide. So we used the findings from our abstraction, and there were many, many more findings that I'm not showing you in lieu of time, but we used that information to help develop what we call a guide. And a link to this guide will be in the chat. It was published in August. And I'm quickly going to show you the major sections in case any of this is of interest to you or to your work. So next slide. So the first section in this guide focuses on the importance of involving the community. And we provide 2 examples from LA and Jersey City in their plans. Next slide. I'll just go through these quickly. We discuss how analysis of current conditions and opportunities for change, and we frame that around 6 R's. Next slide. We also discuss how to develop evidence-based metrics to take the metrics from principles, vision, and goals all the way down to objectives, actions, and performance measures. And where I was describing the coding of the goal themes that I did, we have that complete coding in section 3. And for each example, or for each theme, we pull out example plans. So you can see if there's a goal you're interested in, you can identify other plans in our library of plans that are actually working on the topic. Next slide. And then in section 4, we discuss evaluation and implementation. Next slide. And then in our appendices are probably almost as long as the guide. We have a listing of resources, a checklist to help for communities wanting to develop a plan, some examples of other plans to review when you're developing your Vision Zero plan. And then finally, a history of traffic safety paradigms in the US. And this is If you're not familiar with the E's, this gives you background to that, which is very good. Next slide. So we also realized that Vision Zero can happen independent of what we call a plan. And this is just one example of a community that passed a resolution and ordinance and then works from what we call an action plan. Next slide. So moving on, we are now working on Vision Zero implementation, understanding how Vision Zero happens with or without a plan. That work is currently in progress. Next slide. And then through our experience, we're seeing an emergence of regional Vision Zero plans. And this development is encouraging as metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs, play a vital role in planning, funding, and policy creation at the regional level. There are actually 407 MPOs, and more than 85% of Americans live in an MPO. So we hope to do work in this area in 2021. So next slide, and I think this goes back to Seth.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And for setting us up to talk about North Carolina. So we go from the regions that Kelly is referencing, how most people live within an MPO, up to a state. One of the things we're doing at UNC is working closely with the Governor's Highway Safety Program to assist these communities that are listed here in implementing Vision Zero in North Carolina. We're focusing on a lot of the same diffusion principles that Kelly referenced and we talked about earlier, identifying the opinion leaders in road safety, bundling safety procedures. So basically, they're called intervention clusters often, where you provide choice for people. That kind of gives them a sense of freedom in what they implement. And then providing guidance, a lot of coaching. I'll talk about that in a second. So this is just a schematic of the sociometric sort of environment in North Carolina with the professionals. We did the same approach in North Carolina and saying, who do you look to for advice? And we saw major clustering in Raleigh, especially, as you can see there, but also in Charlotte, Durham, and Asheville. Every one of those opinion leading cities is operating some sort of Vision Zero program. Asheville is sort of paused right now, but we look to re-engage them soon. So that is good news, that it means that we are ready to kind of accelerate the adoption of different practices. One of the things we have done to help them understand like where they are in the implementation, we've developed this guide, this milestone checklist. It's free to download for anybody. You can find it there at the link. Basically with setting an expectation that full implementation, as Leah was saying, the transformative change that's required for Vision Zero and safe systems is going to take 2 to 4 years, probably closer to 4, maybe even beyond that. We want to provide a self-assessment for people to reflect upon where they might be in implementation. Give a sense also what some of the next steps might be for to go to the next phase. Another resource we have is what we call safety procedures. So these are basically countermeasures that in the literature are shown to reduce fatal and serious injury that can be proceduralized. So put over a long area or proceduralized in practice in your work. These are also politically vetted. So we reached out to our colleagues in North Carolina, a lot of the people working in municipalities, and said, imagine yourself pitching this to your town or city council. To what extent would they be in favor or oppose it? We averaged that across 12 of them to get a kind of robust estimate of which were going to be politically viable. So an example of something that is omitted from this is automated speed enforcement. Though we know it works really well, it is not politically viable at the moment in North Carolina. So we have these other strategies, such as road diets you see here, traffic calming near schools, lighting at pedestrian crossings, and so on. There's 8 of them. We had a pool of about 20 that we started with, and now we whittled down to 8, sort of like a menu. So with the Vision Zero effort in North Carolina for this fiscal year, we're really focusing on a public health systems approach to this. And Leah is actually helping us by providing some advice and guidance on this as well. We have these cores that are built around this, providing coaching that'll culminate this year in sort of a systems training institute for partners in the state. and provide, of course, regular support, technical assistance. These are our cores, and I'll talk about them just very briefly. We have our road safety principles. So these are things that we've already discussed today, right? Developing these plans, community engagement. There's evidence-based strategies we know of. Kelly is actually heading up this monitoring, evaluating Vision Zero progress. So she's, talking about the implementation. To what extent are they actually folding this in and making this transformative change in the communities? Change management within the organization is actually doing the work. So adaptive leadership, conflict management, how do we get people working in different sectors working together, developing aligned goals, et cetera. And then we get into systems thinking and strengthening. This is really about understanding, taking a pulse of the community, to what extent they think road safety is an issue, building this coalitions and recruiting and retaining membership, and then employing systems thinking to really deal with and contend with the complexity that is road safety issues. So with that, I want to thank you and open it up to questions anyone has or any comments.
Yeah, Seth, I will be taking any questions if. So if you are in the audience and you have a question, please go ahead and drop that in. Okay, I see a handful here. This one says the Towards Zero Death program and Zero Fatalities program is more dominant in the Midwest than Vision Zero. For instance, Minnesota began TZD in 2003, also patterned after Sweden, but called it something different. That may be why your data didn't show as high of awareness of Vision Zero versus TZD.
Very good point. We have looked at the relationship between Vision Zero, which tends to be at the sub-state level. So at UNPO, as Kelly was mentioning, and the city, town level. Towards Zero Deaths actually seems to be a practice adopted more by state DOTs. Probably related to, we think, a lot of the different priorities that states have vis-a-vis their municipalities, right? They have a lot more concern about commerce, interstate commerce, a lot more concern about different road users, such as the trucking, people that work in the trucking industry, et cetera. Different policy levers that they have. So it's sort of a different animal, but certainly related. And one of the things we looked for in the plans, and Kelly can speak to this, is to what extent the plans, the local Vision Zero plans were integrated with maybe a state TZD effort. Kelly, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that.
Yeah, we did not find much evidence of the local plans mentioning or integrating with the state plan, even though there were often state representatives on the plan or mentioned as stakeholders. We didn't find the state plan actually referenced.
Great, thanks Kelly and Seth. There are 3 comments in here related specifically to some other Vision Zero plans that you may not be aware of. One, Alyssa Frank left one in for Palm Beach. Philip Boutel, and I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name, left one in for Santa Cruz, California, saying that they are hoping to have baseline data presented in January. Karen Odenthal shared that Central Lane MPO has a regional Vision Zero plan. And this brings us to a question from Chip Vote. I think that's how that's pronounced. How do you see technologies like ISA, Intelligent Speed Assistance, playing a role in an effective overall plan for municipalities?
I don't know, Kelly, do you want to take that or?
Well, first of all, thank you for putting in the chat those missing plans. I'm kind of obsessed with this, so hopefully we can save the chat, but I will add those. No, I think I'll give that back to you.
That is something, yes, I'm glad you mentioned this, the assisted intelligent speed assistance. Yes, we think that is critical. It's something that we've discussed quite a bit, speed governors, et cetera. This is something that European countries have experimented with as well. And it might be the intelligent part of it, we hope, is that they have a sense of sort of the surrounding environment so that they know that this might be a place where there's maybe people outside of vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists, children, things like that. And it automatically triggers deceleration so that you have the environments that both support that, but then also the vehicles are augmenting. So this is actually related to the principle of duplication, right? We want to make sure that we have some redundancies in the system so that if one part fails, that something is there to back it up.
Okay, there's another question that just came in, and that is, with traffic of all modes altered due to pandemic response, are you seeing many plans changing their goals or updating their dates?
That's a great question, and I think that's one we'll have to continue to look at. In our work this year, we have been documenting in communities how they might have been impacted. Their Vision Zero program might have been impacted by the pandemic. We're actually conducting interviews this month and next month in 10 to 20 communities. And that's one of the questions we'll be asking to find out how the pandemic has impacted their Vision Zero program. But surprisingly, just anecdotally, there are Vision Zero plans still being published in 2020. And then there are other Vision Zero programs that kind of were put on pause. And Seth, I don't know if you have observations from this, but that's what I've observed.
Yeah, Kelly, it's certainly consistent with what you've observed. Especially, we do quite a bit of outreach with people in the country, but then in North Carolina as well. And for the most part, there was a bit of a pause, and basically in practice. So if they were developing a comprehensive plan, that may have been on a hiatus for a minute. So I don't know. I'd be curious to see, baseline levels of planning activity vis-a-vis, right now that under the pandemic. I suspect it's been suppressed quite a bit. There's been just a lot less planning activity because it's so naturally partner related and partner driven, right? Well, ideally it is, but when it's harder to convene people, then it probably suffers a bit.
And I'll add,
Seth,
this is Leah. So I was going to share that
Leah, go ahead.
I'm sensing more, I don't want to say more per se, but as y'all referenced earlier, but more interest overall in this topic from regions, from the metropolitan planning organizations, and I would say some states too, not as much as the MPOs, but it's really encouraging overall to hear more state departments of transportation reference, how can we kind of take that approach? And maybe that links back to an earlier question asked. I'll just say, I think one of the differences, and y'all already explained so much of this, there are differences generally in how the states have approached towards zero deaths and how cities are now approaching Vision Zero. I would say one of my perceptions of that is that the state TZD work traditionally has not had a strong safe systems underpinning. I'm not saying none do or that none is there, it's not complete, but I'd say a difference is that towards zero deaths seems to still traditionally, as it's been last, say, 5 to 10 years, more of the typical ease approach with, education, enforcement, engineering, et cetera. Whereas increasingly, and especially at the local level, because let's be honest, they're smaller and more nimble generally and able to make the pivot, more easily. But that pivot is happening, I think, to evolve beyond the ease. The ease are still in there, but it's a different approach and more of that safe systems thinking. So I'll just say, I think that's encouraging, and to the point of like, are things slowing down or not? I think that's going to be interesting to watch, but also to remind people, it doesn't necessarily take a lot of money to do what we're talking about. I mean, eventually, yes, it all takes money, but it's really about internal shifting and how we're prioritizing existing work. The early Vision Zero plans and communities kicked off and got a year or 2 or 3 or 4 in without extra dollars, without extra staff positions. They were really reorienting their existing processes and work. And I think that's important so people don't get scared off from this, thinking they need a brand new big budget line.
I want to tag a question onto that since it's relevant to both what you just said, Leah, and to something that Seth said earlier. And that is, if a community wants to become a Vision Zero city, what is the first step? Is consulting help available?
Leah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what should the community really be doing and thinking, you know, and I think you guys lay this out so well in your guide, but you know, I think it's really important that the internal team, the city staff or the agency, various agency staff, if we all talked about, especially the transportation department, public health, the mayor's office or city council, the policy people are really leading, even if they are bringing consultants in. That can be a great thing, especially if they have the resources and that's going to help them go further and faster and better. That's awesome. But you still want the agency staff to own the work, right? Not just to hand it off and say, great, bring us back a finished product. So I think in the consultant world, there's so many, you know, so many talented folks doing this work. It's exciting, it's growing. And I think they would also say, you know, you don't want to be in charge of your plan 100%, right? You want to really make sure that people are internally buying in and learning and growing into it. That's my thought.
Yeah, Leah, I'll second that. Here. There is this perception, and probably because it's not helpful necessarily, that New York City, with a lot of resources, is sort of a forerunner of this. But really, you know, for transformative change, it seems to be different sectors, people in different agencies coming together to start understanding to what extent their goals are aligned, their agency goals and missions. And often they'll find that they are quite aligned. A lot of their goals are. And then start sharing resources, data, personnel, whatever it might be, together. When they shift their practice toward this sort of collaborative model, you start seeing greater possibilities open up. When people in affordable housing start working with people in street design, when transit agencies start working with people in injury prevention, you start seeing all these different programs and different ways of just doing business pop up, and then getting together to do a plan really kind of solidifies that and makes public their intention to work together to actually toward a common goal. A lot of this can be kind of maybe accelerated or spiced up with some consulting work to help with maybe more technical aspects, but certainly it doesn't require that necessarily.
I think we have time for one more question. I do want to ask this one because I think it's a good one. And that is, Seth, you mentioned trucking. How can we frame Vision Zero in a way that has benefits for commercial vehicles to help the adoption? My experience is that many efforts to improve safety, specifically for pedestrians and people on bikes, face opposition based on costs for those who must operate a business.
That's a really great question. You're right. The industry, often there can be industry goals that are sort of in conflict with safety, right? If you think of getting something off Amazon and you expect that to happen to get to you within a day, you know, there's going to be some shortcuts made. There's maybe some speeding involved or whatever it might be. I think a lot of it has to do with logistics in that case, right? Is where are we having trucks traverse? Right now, a lot of them, especially in rural North Carolina, for example, are traveling right through the hearts of downtowns in a lot of these smaller towns that are closer to the ports. What do we do? Do we maybe reroute those trucks because they are so large and imposing? Because downtown areas are supposed to serve access purposes, right? People on foot caring about their business. You have trucks traversing that, probably not a great idea. So it seems like a bit of coordination with the industry, people working in trucking might be in order. But certainly it's easier said than done, really, to start talking about the cultural elements as well, right? Wes, this is something you and I have been talking about for a while, and you've been thinking about with ITE and others. You know, how do we start engaging with the cultural aspects of this as well? Appealing to leaders and people that have influence within those sectors to start joining the cause.
Thanks, Seth. It is 3 o'clock. I think we're going to have to call it good here. So thank you all for attending. Before you go, I did want to tell you about our next webinar. This will be on February 24th, 2021 from 2 to 3 p.m. ET. And the presenter will be Dr. Eric Dumbaugh, and he'll be talking about crash risk for low-income and minority populations, identifying at-risk cohorts and underlying risk factors. So thank you so much for being here, for entertaining us and giving us questions, and we just look forward to talking with you next year. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.